and technology takes a minute to connect. Hi, everybody. This is Dionne Mejer, founder of Revenue by Design, and we are talking with you today about Lead with Soul Success Stories series. Say that fast 3 times. Holy cow. And the reason we're doing this is to share with you stories from the folks that were kind enough to contribute their time to my upcoming book, Lead with Soul Ambiguous to Agile. And the purpose of Lead with Soul is it is a workbook style book that is set to guide you into creating your leadership methodology. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today and why it's important and how it comes to life to really produce the results that we're all anxious to see at the end of the day. So, Brad, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here, Dion. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And everybody, Brad and I crossed paths probably a year and a half ago. At the time, your organization was potentially looking at starting an inside sales team. That never really materialized, but we've stayed in touch since then. And Brad was gracious enough to, again, be interviewed for my book. And I want to give a little bit of background on Brad. His background is amazing. He's an international business executive, author, and speaker, recognized for his leadership in global sales strategy and persuasion. He's a senior leader at Global Sims. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And Brad, you have helped guide the company's worldwide growth in simulation technology. You've traveled to more than 90 countries. You've built multicultural, multinational teams, negotiated contracts, led large-scale training and technology initiatives for clients across the ports and defense sectors. You've written a book, which is amazing. And so, as someone who knows how difficult that is, it's definitely a labor of love. Your approach blends analytical thinking with human psychology, which is very important these days, equipping leaders to communicate vision, inspire performance, and drive measurable results. And so, beyond that, you share insights on leadership, persuasion, and global business. So, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And so we mentioned a little bit about Global Sims, and you've recently had a change there. And then we're going to dive into having you share some stories about how you identified your leadership methodology and how you used it to achieve these remarkable results.
Well, sure. Happy to jump in and discuss. And you mentioned Global Sim. Up until 4 weeks ago, I was a co-owner of Global Sim. I had a couple of partners, and we are in the simulation business. And we sell large simulators for cranes and heavy equipment all throughout the world. And that career's taken me, all over to 90 plus countries. But 4 weeks ago, we had a change. Our company was acquired. So
Yeah.
my two partners kind of went their separate way. I was hired by the company that acquired us. Actually, our top competitor came along, made an offer we couldn't refuse, and so
Sure.
so now I work for my top competitor. I'm still getting used to that. I'm still getting used to having a boss, but it is an exciting and kind of transition time for me personally and for our company.
Sure. Well, congratulations on that. And isn't this the year of transition? I keep hearing that from a lot of folks, and you and your story are another example of that evolution we all go through for sure. So thank you for sharing that. And what we want to dive into today, Lead with Soul is written because there is no such thing as a leadership methodology. And so we all know the stats nowadays as far as team disengagement and burnout. And so, Brad, when we think about being a leader, I think that we need all should have our own leadership methodology. Meaning we're predictable, our team knows what's coming. And so when we think about that, tell us a little bit about your own methodology and share a story or two about how that showed up.
Well, yeah, and leadership's so important, and you're right. It can be kind of all over. Everybody's got different thoughts. A lot of great books on leadership. When I think about leadership, let me give you two examples, and I think there's a couple of
Please.
takeaways that I'll kind of get to. But um, years ago, over a decade ago, I was in a place called Qinghangdao, China. And I was there for what I thought was an introductory meeting, and I'm with my local agent. This is a big city in China, but not one that tourists go to. It's basically like a 3-hour train ride from Beijing.
Okay.
But I had this introductory meeting, or so I thought. But on the way there, I see my name. I saw a sign, and I should have known it was more than just a sign, right? But we go there, and all of a sudden we get out, and there's at least 20 people that come to greet me, including the CEO. There's a small press corps that's there, and I get out of the car and I'm shaking hands. I thought I was an ambassador. I mean, it was unusual. And as we're walking up, I see my name again on a big marquee, and I'm thinking, well, what's the deal here? This is unusual. I'm just here for a quick introductory meeting. And so we get into that meeting. Really interesting. In about 10 minutes, I realized I was way in over my head. They were not expecting an introductory meeting. They had detailed technical questions. They had a lot of stuff. And of course, a lot of this is kind of coming through my translator, my agent who was translating.
Yeah.
But clearly I was in way over my head. And I was really unprepared. And I actually go into this story more in depth in my book, believe it or not. But ultimately, it was truly an embarrassing situation and an example of being unprepared. And these guys were ready to sign a deal. And the fact that I came in unprepared, that lost potentially $1 million deal. And that opportunity went on. And I'm a believer that you kind of learn sometimes from your failures just as much as your successes. And that was really a learning experience for me. Fast forward a couple years after that, different situation. This one is in Virginia. Had a meeting, and again, the night before the meeting, maybe thinking a little bit back to a couple years earlier, I thought, I'm going to dive in a little deeper and prepare a little bit more for this. And this was not a meeting with a potential client; it was a potential partner. So there was going to be a few executives in the room, and it didn't seem like it was as high stakes. However, did a little extra preparation. This is in the days before ChatGPT. And so one thing I did is I remember getting online and researching who their competitors were. I found out that one of their main competitors was also a competitor for us.
Oh, wow.
So the next day we're sitting there, and there's the introductions, and we sit down around this big round boardroom table. And all of a sudden, there's kind of this awkward silence. And by the way, my CEO was there. He was our senior partner, and he was there as well that day. And there's this awkward silence, and the conversation is not really going anywhere. And then I kind of insert myself into the conversation. I said, hey, I want to ask some questions about someone who I think we both know. And I bring up this competitor. And all of a sudden, that changed the direction of the conversation. And it showed kind of the exact opposite of what I had 2 years earlier. It showed that, hey, I was prepared, and that not just me, but that our company was prepared, and that we had this dialogue, and we had kind of a strategy, at least the framework of a strategy in place. And that turned out to be a great meeting that set the stage for really a good partnership. In fact, I'm still in touch with a couple of those guys at that company. And after that meeting, our CEO took me aside and he says, Brad, that was the exact right thing to say at the exact right time. And so here's the takeaway. I think a couple of quick takeaways. Number one is you can't understate preparation, whether it be just doing a little effort. And sometimes it's just that extra 10 minutes, late at night, early in the morning. Preparation is key as a leader. People know when you're faking it. They know when you're winging it, and it can be easily detected. And sometimes it just takes a little bit more of that preparation, and that goes a long way. And I learned that in those two examples. But I think here's the other, hopefully, the other takeaway is a lot of times we think of leadership and we think of our direct reports. We're their boss. They report to us. I've got to be a good leader. We forget that sometimes it's those who are adjacent to us.
Yeah.
whether it be an agent, whether it be a partner, whether it be a coworker that may not report to you. And setting an example is critical, and showing
Yeah.
leadership, whether it be preparation, setting an example, um, showing initiative, when it's not our direct reports, but it's somebody adjacent to us, is really critical. And I think in both of those stories I shared, there was some leadership there. I didn't have a direct report with me in either of those cases,
Mm.
but in both cases, both a failure of preparation and leadership, and then an example where there was some leadership shown, at least in preparation, with a potential partner. And then, of course, we did have a partnership with them eventually. And um, you don't think that, but a lot of times it's not that direct report.
Yeah.
And I'll just say one other thing. I've got an extended family, and growing up, thinking back to my youth, I had a few uncles, and I really looked up to my uncles. I had one really good uncle, and I had a bad uncle as well that didn't care about me. And I think that's kind of common, actually, growing up, that, we all have a weird uncle, right? And I think about that a lot now, because I've got nephews who are teenagers right now. I've got nieces as well who are teenagers right now. And I think about, okay, I've got my own children, but it's also incumbent upon me to set an example and to show interest, care for those who aren't my direct reports. And that includes my family, my nieces and nephews. I think that's important. And I do think about that a lot. And I think that's a
Mhm.
leadership takeaway, is don't just think about your direct reports. Think a little broader than that, of who's watching, who's paying attention to you. So anyway, I hope that's a quick anecdote to share, but I,
Yeah, Brad, thank you. I think the stories that you shared were really important and also reflective of the work that you do, and reflective of the work that Lead with Soul is hoping leaders do for ourselves and our teams and our companies and our families, because people can feel effort and energy.
yeah,
Even if we show up and we're not prepared, right? Which is kind of one of those things we're going to talk about in a second. But I think it's people can feel effort and energy. If you show up and you're tuned out, your camera's not on, you're clearly multitasking, just don't show up to begin with. There's no point. And
yeah.
I think from a leadership perspective, one of the questions I asked all of you was, what are your top values? And in the book, we go through one, we share kind of the top value. There's a table in the book that talks about it. And it really drives everybody to identify their top values. And I was actually looking through my notes, and I don't have your answers in front of me, for a variety of reasons. So speaking of not being prepared, but it sounds like what the notes I do have, what you're talking about is accountability and being prepared. And I think that resonates a lot with a lot of people, because the purpose of leadership and why Lead with Soul exists is to address the employee engagement problem that we have right now that is costing people in hard and soft dollars. So can you tell us a little bit about, I mean, clearly what you did was extraordinary. You were able to take your company um, from beginning to being sold. Can you tell us a little bit more quantitatively what that looks like? Um, I'm trying to kind of skirt the issue, right? Because I want to be mindful of people are looking for hard and soft dollars, right? So one of our interviewees, they took their company from a couple hundred million to a billion, and they're on track to grow to 2 billion. Can you maybe share with us the quantitative number there, and maybe how your qualitative characteristics of be prepared and show up on time and things of that nature contributed to that?
Yeah, and we are not a $200 million company. You know, we're a firm of 30 employees. And so, you know, we're looking, you know, much smaller in the millions, not tens of millions type of
That's
thing, if you're looking for a number there.
Yep.
Nevertheless, I think that, um, you know, the hard numbers have their place and are important. But I think there's some context with everything, and I'm a believer in that. Listen, I love analytics. I've got a finance degree, and that I never used, by the way. Uh, Nevertheless, I got the finance degree and ended up going into sales and marketing, and I've been there for really, you know, nearly 30 years. I do think that the key with analytics, though, is there's context, there's footnotes, there's
100%.
exceptions, and I think that shows leadership as well, is being able to notate and provide perspective and insight in a situation. And that's the world that I live in. We typically, I mean, obviously is sales and business development are a huge part of our company. And as part of that, it's one thing to sell a widget for $5,000. That's not my line of work. We're selling $1 million systems. And to do that, it oftentimes takes 18 months, 2 years, sometimes 3 years. It
Yeah.
took me 7 years to close a deal in Vietnam. I worked 7 years on it and finally got it closed back in 2023. And again, if you were to just look at pipeline and you were look at the hard numbers, you know, you could have said, oh, that's never going to happen, give up on that. But again, nuance, and we developed a little methodology. It's less related to leadership, more related to sales, of how to track the nature of big deals like that. We call it the get and go methodology for essentially for pipeline management, and we adhered to that fairly strictly,
Yeah.
and found results in that. And what this particular methodology did in the world of B2B sales, especially sales where there's a long sales cycle, is that methodology allowed us to dive in and capture the nuance, not only of the likelihood of winning the deal if somebody had the money right then, but okay, what if they don't have the money right then? How do we manage that buyer's journey accordingly? And so that's what our methodology, in fact, that's a little bit about what my book's about, is how we capture that and provide nuance in a complex sell situation. So
Yeah. I love that too, Brad, because I think what I'm hearing between the lines is that you called out as well is the nuance of relationship, where it wasn't you're not in a position right now to afford our $1 million solution. It was, okay, not right now. What can we do to keep working together and keep the lines of communication open? And I think that is so important as well, where we're not slamming the door, whether it's on our clients or our internal teams at the end of the day. And that's the whole genesis of Lead with Soul, right? And I love what you're saying, because leadership is so broad. And when we are in a leadership role by title or deed, we have a lot of eyes on us. And it's just the way it is. And so I love what you're talking about there, because the other thing that is really important to think through is behavior is caught, not taught. And that's when we have these conversations at the end of the day that do as I say, not as I do. Oh, heck no, right? So if we're canceling one-on-ones with our team, or we're showing up to a team meeting unprepared, we're showing up to maybe a client meeting unprepared, which quite frankly, we've all done. I don't think there's anybody on this planet that has not done that, right? But if we repeat those things, that is behavior that becomes acceptable. And I think that's the other correlation here, is that behavior drives outcomes at the end of the day. And sometimes we forget that. So one of the exercises I have leaders go through is it's a 5C leadership pulse assessment across clarity and conversion in 5 areas that start with the letter C, to your point, and we start writing behavior-based goals, because leadership is behavior.
Sure.
And that drives results, and that drives outcomes, both good and bad, And so that's what that looks like. So when I first reached out, let's talk about that for a minute. When I first reached out and said, "Hey, I'm writing a book on Lead with Soul, and here's what we're doing with it, and here's the 8 questions I want to ask everybody, and all that good stuff." Do you recall? I know it's been a minute because it takes a while to write a book, but do you recall maybe your initial reaction or thoughts when that email first came across?
Well, I love the idea. And I really like the fact that you brought together multiple different people from multiple different disciplines. I think, well, I think there was like a progressive rock band, Alan Parsons Project or something that did the same thing, brought in studio musicians from kind of all over, and that's what I'm thinking. And I love the collaborative approach of getting perspectives from various different people, different industries, and so I thought, oh, this is going to be great, and I was happy to contribute. But anyway, that was my initial thought.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's exactly what you wanted to hear. It was positive, though, I think.
Thank you. I'm open to all interpretations. There was no hidden agenda behind the question. I'm always curious, what are people's initial reactions, right? And so when I lead workshops and training, I always pause and I'll ask, instead of the question of, does that resonate or what do you think? I'll ask, what are you thinking right now? And it really gets people thinking at the end of the day and kind of sharing, because there's no right or wrong answers. There's just the answer. And then from there, we decide what to do with it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love
everything I've seen from it thus far has been fantastic. I love getting different perspectives, and maybe that's one other takeaway from leadership is that if you're a leader and you stop learning, that's not a good thing. True leaders, continue their process and continue their learning journey. And so I look at that as, there's a lot more to learn. Doesn't matter where you are in your career.
Amen to that. It never ends. That's for darn sure. Well, thank you for sharing some of your stories with us today, Brad. We really appreciate you stopping by. It is a very busy time for you with everything going on right now. So, what is next for you and your journey?
Well, you've got a good question there. I'm heavily involved. I travel next week. In fact, I think I'm gone, for the next 6 weeks. I'll be in Europe and then Asia. There's a lot of transferring knowledge to my new coworkers and new colleagues, and I'll see what the next thing brings for me. There's maybe a side hustle, a project. I do have another book in mind. It's probably down the road a year or two. As you know, Dionne, putting together a book, writing it, it's a big task. And I have the idea, I have the framework, but I'm not ready to fully jump into that just yet. So
yeah. I understand that. Well, Brad, thank you for contributing to Lead with Soul. Thank you for writing your own book and bringing your knowledge to the world. And everybody, if you haven't yet, get on the wait list for Lead with Soul. It's coming out soon. We're waiting in the final round of editing and getting the audiobook going for those of you that prefer the audiobook. But make sure you get on the wait list. I'll put the link into the show notes so you'll see that. Make sure you connect with both Brad and I if you have any questions or simply to connect. I know the people in my network and myself included are always happy to give generously as when we can, for sure. So thank you for joining everybody today, and we will chat soon. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.